Snow White. What can we say about this 1937 masterpiece? A film that was considered almost a cinematic miracle at the time, and whose 2025 live action remake was deemed a disaster in many aspects even before its release. The live action Snow White has been stirring up controversy long before hitting theaters, starting with Disney's choice for Snow White, played by Rachel Zegler, who is of Colombian descent. This decision didn't sit well with critics or fans because, well, she isn't white as snow. And in my opinion, even before watching the movie, I already felt she lacked the delicacy and sweetness of the original Snow White. After watching it, I could only confirm that. They really shouldn't have picked her for the lead role. Then we have Gal Gadot as the Evil Queen, a visually fitting choice, but when it comes to action, another letdown. Both actresses suffered from the same issue, a lack of life in their expressions and intensity. And I would love to introduce the 7 actors who played the dwarfs, but we'll get to that soon. Just a reminder, this video is a recap of the movie, so expect spoilers as well as my personal opinions based on my experience watching it. Well, you've been warned, so let's go. The movie begins by telling Snow White's story in the fastest, most rushed way possible, with no emphasis on key moments that could have been developed better. For example, the fact that her father left her behind to live with her stepmother while he went off to war to protect his kingdom. This was poorly worked because they could have added some emotion right from the start, making the audience connect with Snow White's story. But that didn't happen, so let's move on. After her father leaves for war, her stepmother reveals her cruelty, hoards all reserves from the village for herself, and forces Snow White to become nothing more than a servant. During the transition from child to grown-up Snow White, we already get a taste of the poor acting we will have to endure from the protagonist. Her expressions in this transition is seen make it painfully obvious that she is acting, when she should be living the character. Right after this transition, we met Prince Charming. Well, at least the guy who was supposed to be Prince Charming. He sneaks into the castle, making some noise, which catches Snow White's attention. She goes to investigate and finds him, stealing potatoes. Hey, he's just trying to survive, right? So Snow White's Prince Charming is nothing more than a thief. Or better yet, Jonathan, the thief. After catching him, Snow White gives him a lecture about stealing, and he tries to justify himself, saying he's doing it for the people. In the end, he ends up locked up at the castle's main entrance, which honestly is hilarious. Who leaves a prisoner in such an obvious place? And worse, Snow White later goes to free him, and nobody sees a thing. Weird. But just when I think no one noticed, the evil queen actually did see everything. She orders the huntsman to take Snow White into the forest, kill her, and place her tiny, delicate heart inside a box. But once in the forest, we get a scene that gave me embarrassment. It was sudden, emotionless, and so poorly acted by both sides that I was simply amazing these people were actually paid to perform in this film. Anyway, the huntsman points a knife at Snow White, but in the end he couldn't kill her, so he lets her escape into the woods. This leads to one of the most iconic scenes from the 1937 film, the terrifying sequence where she gets lost in the forest. And once again, they manage to drain all the emotion, fear, and significance out of it. Instead of a powerful moment, it just feels like a transition scene, showing that she ran away from some monster that we never actually see or understand. She falls into a lake, emerges, and has her first interaction with the forest animals. A moment that should have been touching, but of course, they sucked all emotion and connection out of it. The animals are cute, sure, but something about them feels off. Their overly expressive, exaggerated eyes and smiles look unnecessary. But honestly, the worst part of this scene isn't even the animals, it's Rachel Zegler's action. Her facial expressions are so lifeless that we don't even feel like she likes animals. She's just there, stuck in the random forest with creatures she couldn't care less about. Then she follows the animals to a house that, compared to the original movie, makes no sense. A dwarf's house that looks bigger than my own. And the inside, even bigger. Since when? But Snow White, being our brilliant protagonist, decides that an abandoned house in the middle of nowhere is the perfect place for a nap. Because Who wouldn't think the same, right? And now comes the moment everyone had been waiting for before the movie's release, the introduction of the Seven Dwarfs. But instead of real actors, we got CGI. All thanks to Peter Dinklage, who argued that the dwarfs in the movie were mythical beings and shouldn't be portrayed by actors with dwarfism, two completely different things. So that's seven fewer actors getting work and seven more CGI abominations. Seriously, these things are terrifying. They tried to make them somewhat human but still mythical, and the result is pure nightmare fuel. And I'm an adult. Can you imagine a 7 years old watching this? Anyway, Snow White spends a night at the dwarf's house and decides she must stop running and find her father. But who does she stumble upon instead? Jonathan. And right in the middle of the forest, another totally emotionless musical number begins. Honestly, all the musical moments in this film felt forced and awkward, completely failing to engage the audience. After the musical nightmare ends, a random arrow flies in, signaling that the Queen's soldiers are after Snow White. With the help of the forest animals, she sets a trap, evades capture, but Jonathan takes an arrow to the shoulder. Desperate, she takes him back to the dwarf's house because apparently, on top of being miners, they are soul healers. The head dwarf takes Jonathan inside, and after just a few hours, he is magically recovered. Now we get to the only scene I actually liked, the Queen making the famous poison apple. I have to say, the old witch's version of the Queen was the most interesting character in the whole movie. At least she had personality, unlike the rest of the cast. So the evil queen takes the apple and goes straight to the dwarf's house where Snow White is alone with no one around. The witch convinces her to eat the apple, which will poison her, and only the kiss of the true love will be able to bring her back. Meanwhile, Jonathan, who was imprisoned again, managed to escape, and with the help of the huntsman, who was also imprisoned there, both manage to break free, and Jonathan runs back to the forest to find Snow White, but they are already preparing her funeral. He arrives and, without any hope, gives her the most lifeless kiss I've ever seen in a fairy tale, and she wakes up. Honestly, the most pathetic true love's kiss scene I've ever witnessed. Snow White then brings everyone together to storm the castle, with no plan, no weapons, and no logic. But she carried kindness in her heart. And in a movie like this, kindness is the most important thing, isn't it? Snow White managed to convince all the guards by reminding them of their past and who they once were. As a result, they all turn against the evil queen, who tries to kill Snow White but is stopped by a dwarf with a crossbow, who, by the way, is the only dwarf in the entire movie. A move based on a fairy tale called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, yet it only has one dwarf. No comments on that. The queen runs back to the mirror to ask if she's still the most beautiful in the kingdom, and that's when, of course, the mirror delivers a moral lesson. Beauty is not about appearance, but about what comes from within. Because of that, Snow White will always be the most beautiful. Furious, the queen loses it and smashes the mirror into pieces, which then magically resemble trapping her inside. Right after that, everyone hails Snow White as the new queen, and she begins to rule as she always wanted, believing that the true beauty of her kingdom lies not in jewels or gold, but in its people. And so everyone lived happily ever after. Except for us, of course, who had to sit through this movie. Well, Snow White is a movie that, in my opinion, had everything to be amazing, but turned out to be a huge disappointment. The biggest fault for me was the casting choice for Snow White. Rachel Zegler didn't deliver the charm I expected from the original Snow White. The kind, sweet, friendly, and delicate character who brings joy and emotion just by looking at her. I just couldn't find that in Rachel Zegler, and the worst part of her performance was the weird expressions she made, which conveyed no real emotion. Another major letdown is about how the original movie is filled with emotional and impactful moments. Each scene has emphasis, which creates a connection with the story, but in this live action, everything felt rushed, and anyway, scenes moved too quickly, everything happened suddenly, and not a single key moment truly grabbed my attention. Take the True Love's kiss scene, for example. There was no love, no emotion, no connection between the characters. The dwarfs had those weird, forced expressions, and the kiss, well, it was the most horrible one I've ever seen in a fairy tale. Truly disappointing, just like many other scenes that failed to deliver the emotion they should have. Speaking of the dwarfs, I have to express my deep disappointment with the decision to make them CGI. They look bizarre, just a nightmarish. If I were 5 years old watching this movie, I'd be traumatized for life just by looking at them. And continuing with the characters, the Evil Queen is not safe from criticism either. Visually, Gal Gadot looks stunning in the role, but her acting lacks expressiveness and depth. I never really felt that she was truly evil. She spends most of the movie smiling and barely conveys the real hatred she has for Snow White. And honestly, just thinking about the casting choice, how are we supposed to believe that Gal Gadot is jealous of Rachel Zegler's beauty? I mean, Gal Gadot? Jealous of Rachel Zegler? I don't even have words to describe how wrong that feels. In summary, Snow White's story felt lost in this live action. There was no emphasis where it was needed, no emotion, and even the musical numbers, usually the most exciting parts, fell completely flat. The songs, the characters, the dialogue, the expressions, and the connection to Snow White's original story just weren't there. It felt like they just threw together a bunch of random scenes into an hour and 40 minutes, edited them, and called it a movie. Well guys, that's my review, opinion and critique of Snow White. I'd give it a 4 out of 10 because they had everything to make it amazing and instead they just did it half-heartedly. Hope you enjoyed the video, leave a like if you did, stay happy, watch movies and see you around.